This company is about to be hit by ransomware. All their computers will be encrypted because one employee fell for this phishing email. And I've got the contents right here, coming from supposedly their IT security team with a big notice that has action required, and they want you to run this defenderscan.js for security verification. They say, hey, Farola user, our IT security team identified a critical need to verify and ensure the security integrity of your workstation. To accomplish this, we need your immediate cooperation in running defenderscan.js. Now, this goes on to talk about, look, why you would do this. It goes on and continues with the social engineering pretext, all the things to trick you, lure the victim into immediately, urgently completing the task and working through all the operations here. Now, what we can do in this video is actually walk through the attack chain, do a little bit of malware analysis, and reverse engineer a multi-stage payload that ultimately detonates ransomware across the environment. So to dive in, I'm inside of my Windows 11 virtual machine, and I will be using this as my analysis VM. I've got a couple tools loaded, and I do have some antivirus exclusion set over across the entire file system, so I can tinker and play with the malware sample here. But please let me say, look, if you're doing this, you should absolutely be inside of a virtual machine for your own safety and security. With all that said, I've got this folder created called Investigation. I can open this up, and there was this simple file, DefenderScan, actually included in the payload that was sent. They do note this as a VHDX file, one of those sort of virtual hard disk files that is something that Windows can just run and work with, and it'll look like it's mounting files on your file system, or at least opening up a new drive like E as a new volume that's opened. If I may say, that is one of the clever tricks that a lot of malware authors and threat actors use, trying to smuggle in other files and content inside of like a container file, like VHDX, ISO, zip, whatever. But inside here, we do have this defenderscan.js file. That is JScript, using a lot of the Windows native dialect and some of the syntax capable being ran locally on the endpoint. So not JavaScript like you might think of in the web browser. But this is really where things kick off. The readme.txt file is simply a sample of the phishing email, but for our investigation, we can go ahead and work with the defenderscan.js file. Quick note, I've just added that E drive as a folder within my antivirus exclusion so I can keep working with it, but if I may, if you're up for it, you could totally do a lot of the initial analysis maybe on a separate operating system like Linux. So a lot of those .js, even Visual Basic Script, or Windows native code won't just run or give you any worry or concern when you're tinkering with some malware samples. With that in mind though, it might be easier to do some dynamic analysis in a sandbox that you can trust if we tweak and tune some of the contents of the malicious script here. So I've got this open in Sublime Text, my text editor of choice, and we can start to walk through some of the code. Note the very first initial line here, hey, defining a new ActiveX object. One of the key indicators that this is going to be JScript running locally on a Windows endpoint. And we've got a couple variables like B64S, B64IMG, and you can assume this is likely base64 encoded data. Something that we could extract out, maybe understand a little bit more of, but I think we should keep looking through the code and seeing really what it does here. It defines a function bin to file, presumably taking in a bin data variable, like a binary data likely, and then fname for a file name that this all gets saved and written out to. Looks like they have some other convenience functions for B64, likely base64 to string, to decode and actually determine the plain text out of that base64 material, alongside bin to string, pulling binary data out and hey, returning the text from it. Looks like it is actually called using that B64 to string decode function here on the IMG variable we saw defined just up top. Puts that in bin data, saves a fname or file name for redbadger.webp, okay, and ends up using that function call to write the contents to that file. We did see that syntax here where it opens that actual object and then writes the data, saves it, and closes the handle. So that looks like, hey, our first little indicator of compromise. At the very least, hey, something touching disk, something actually on the file system that could be an artifact for this exploitation here. Looks like it carries on with a decoded bin, a decoded script, and some stuff that ends up getting staged with other capabilities of that file system object we saw created with that variable f. Now, ultimately, it ends up using PowerShell syntax. We can see down below, var cmd is a new object that's being spawned out of that sh little ActiveX object to run with the shell commands. PowerShell with an execution policy bypass, totally ignoring whatever, I don't know, remote signed, unrestricted execution policy that could be set, with a command included in ampersanding or concatenating and adding in here, and even invoking the script content that's pulled out of this temporary file that was created just above, as we could see in a little bit of the syntax here, and that ends up invoking it, actually executing it, and evaluating all the contents as real new PowerShell syntax to run with invoke expression. So some stuff gets a little bit sketchy, and obviously this is the stager, hey, the first kind of stage initial layers for this whole ransomware attack chain. But don't you worry, this is not a real company. We're going to keep digging into the code, but before we go too far down the rabbit hole, I would love to tell you, honestly, hey, this is some learning, some education, a practice environment for you to get a little bit smarter in malware analysis and reverse engineering. And this is from Hack the Box. It's one of their Sherlock labs and tasks and activities, trainings and exercises called Lockpick 4.0. It's actually rated as an insane difficulty, but I think it's something we might be able to cruise through. So look, it sets the stage with the scenario. As we've already seen, this organization, suddenly hit by ransomware, and we could download the sample here. And if you want to follow along, there is a link in the video description if you'd like to jump into this Lockpick 4.0 Sherlock from Hack the Box. If you weren't familiar, the Hack the Box Sherlock exercises are really awesome, hands-on, practical, and application-based learning for a lot of digital forensics and incident response, trying to do the investigation and understand what went wrong in maybe a malware scenario. And it's awesome because it is a bit guided and at least asking different tasks, questions, trying to track down maybe pieces of new information that help you walk through the objectives here. So the first one that we could track down is what the MD5 hash is of the first file that the ransomware writes to disk. Well, we saw that in our JScript, right? Back in our text editor and looking again at the source code, remember it did end up staging and writing a file to disk. At the very end here, it had created this temporary file that was saved, but just above, they actually called that other function here bin to file, where it wrote this redbadger.webp file in the current directory here. But look, it used that function, and maybe we could just add some simple notes to see, okay, what is it actually running first, or anytime this function is called, at least writing to a file here, that's probably worthwhile to note, oh, that actually happened. So what I'd like to do is do a little bit of dynamic analysis, and I'll actually use some other function calls here, wscript.echo, to just display out onto the screen, wrote contents to, and then we can add in that fname variable for the file that was included here. We can do the very, very same, maybe down below when it saves another file, and then we'll try to patch out this PowerShell code that ends up getting executed. We don't really want to invoke it. We don't want, hey, that thing to detonate for real in our sandbox. So at the very least, we can be surgical in what we might just remove or avoid and comment out. Looks like we could actually add in the temp file name path here all for this call, but down below, after it ends up staging the CMD variable, we don't want to run it. So let's try to just comment out with the 2 forward slashes in JScript, and we don't need it to delete the temporary file. Let's just see if we could get this to run in our sandbox and go see some of the artifacts that it leaves behind. Obviously, it's just this base64 data that we could certainly decode ourselves, but it might be worth doing the dynamic analysis, letting the code unravel itself, as long as we're smart about diffusing a couple of those landmines at the end. So I'm going to open up a terminal and navigate to that E drive where this file is stored. Let me cd to E:. We can see defender scan in the current directory here, and I could actually invoke this with the command line Windows script host cscript, cscript.exe. You really don't need the file extension at the end, I don't think, but hey, it's good to include, be a little bit explicit here, and we can run our defenderscan.js. Crossing our fingers, I know it's weird to quote-unquote run malware, but we'll be able to see UAC wrote contents to Red Badger and wrote contents to radb6fe1, whatever random temporary name that was given, right? So in the current directory now, I do see that redbadger.webp and our rad temp file. Now, we're looking for the MD5 hash of the first file that it wrote. And we could see from that output just previously, and I can even run it again, nothing wrong with that, it wrote Red Badger first. So look, we're in PowerShell and we can use some of the sweet convenience functions that I think were released in some later versions of PowerShell, but get file hash is a pretty handy commandlet. And we could actually pass in the old Red Badger WEBP file, and that will go ahead and tell me the file hash. It will tell me this in SHA-256 by default, but we could just add another parameter, flag and switch here to say the algorithm should be MD5. Now that will return this hash, and fingers crossed, we can go copy and paste this into that Hack the Box Sherlock. I think we're right here. Let's go ahead and try it. Looking good? Yeah, okay, awesome. Next up, we're trying to track down what is the string that the ransomware uses to check for local admin privileges. Okay, I don't think we're there quite yet, so let's keep cruising through the sample that we have. We could make the original JScript even just print out or echo this command if we wanted to see it all in action, but we know it's really just going to run the contents of that temp file path. That was the rad.temp file, right? So if I open that rad temp file in Sublime Text, I do want to set the syntax here to PowerShell, since we know that is the code that it ends up running, the language behind it there. I hit Control-Shift-P on my keyboard just to open up the command palette, a little input box for Sublime Text. Now we see a couple of the variables that were defined from the defenderscan.js. They actually added in the current file name and current directory based off the current invocation. And then it uses some sweet DLL imports to actually grab some Win32 API functions. You can see show window, you can see set foreground window, and then it defines a couple functions with some strange names. Set scroll of Eru? Okay. Lightly obfuscated, I suppose. Noting there's a variable scroll content with Chicago in the mix. Okay, current directory, current file name, but ooh, CMSTP. That's a little bit clever. I wonder if they're doing some of the UAC or user account control bypasses. That is a common use of CMSTP. But looks like there's another function here called get palantir. And that is just checking probably a process, right? Yeah. Just beyond that, we have set window on Middle Earth that looks like it's using those Win32 API calls. Hey, to set foreground window, show window for whatever was passed in. And I'm wondering if that's used for the CMSTP little trick here. They do have this bypass Gondor gate, okay? Function name where it's using a little bit of the capability here. Yep, with CMSTP, as we would have expected. And then we have a test hobbit in council function. Okay, to check if we are in the local administrators group by, oh, actually, yeah, this is what we were looking for in the Sherlock. Checking the well-known SID for the administrators group, S-1-5, just that usual boilerplate to denote, okay, that is one of the IDs related to administrators. That is probably what we can submit there. Slap that in, hit submit, looking good, excellent. Next up, what is the MITRE attack ID for the technique used by the threat actor to elevate their privileges? Well, we were thinking CMSTP, but let's keep taking a look at the source code. Sounds like test hobbit id council is just kind of validating, oh, you are an administrator, you are in the local admin's capability here, but test Mordor elevation, okay, is determining whether or not you are in actually running as an admin right now, right? If you are from an elevated process. And then we have a couple more base 64 strings, which we could go ahead and decode with CyberChef or whatever. In fact, it's probably worthwhile to grab one of those. It looks a little bit odd. Just for quick and easy convenience, let me do CyberChef because there's no like smart base 64 decoding command on Windows that I know, just off the top of my head, getting the syntax right all off the cuff. So slapping that in from base 64. Ooh, defenderscan.js : lolbin. Lolbin being like a living off the land, hey, trick and technique to use the processes and capabilities that are native and inherent on the operating system where the threat actor lands. And CMSTP, using that as a UAC bypass, is certainly one of those lolbins. But the colon is what I was most interested in because that kind of indicates that we actually had some alternate data streams, some of the NTFS metadata tricks to pull down other content and hide and mask it inside of defenderscan.js. I think we can get content on defenderscan, where in PowerShell we can specify the stream. I believe that's the syntax here. And if we use an asterisk, it'll pull down all the others. Well, if anything, we know that one is called lolbin, right? Okay, yep, and there's a bunch of data there. And the other one we could have pulled from that base64 data. If we really wanted to decode these with, I guess it's like Lord of the Rings obfuscation, Frodo, Aragorn, Legolas. Slapping the other base64 in a cyberchef, that is payload. Gotcha, which we could extract that out as well. And I'm doing this more for showcase. I think we'll see it in the PowerShell code as we explore more of it. But yep, okay, certainly a payload there, some binary data I'm going to assume. But back in the PowerShell script, the actual functionality is checking if we are in the admin group, based off of that test hobbit in council capability and function there. And if we are not elevated, then we will bypass Gondor gate using the CMSTP user account control trick. I'm going to say that is likely what they end up using because of the call for CMSTP. Scroll location, actually staging the INF file. That seems to be the usual play here. And if we want to learn a little bit more about it, we could research it, but I think we might have to next because, hey, that's what the Sherlock was asking for. What is the MITRE attack ID for the technique used by the threat actor to elevate their privileges? So that is the MITRE attack framework that they're discussing there, and that's sort of that, hey, common ground, common language to standardize and talk about how threat actors, hackers, adversaries do what they do in their own tradecraft for malware attacks, exploits, etc. We're looking for that CMSTP, and oh, okay, there is a result from MITRE attack, system binary proxy execution, CMSTP. Notes the ID here, the T to specify the technique, and all the sub-technique components there. Looks like they do include and mention that it's oftentimes used to bypass user account control. So I'm glad I was on the right track there, but I'm thinking this is the ID that we need to give to Hack the Box Sherlock. Let's try it out. We'll go ahead and submit that. Fingers crossed. Looking good. Next, the ransomware starts a process using a signed binary. What is the full name of the signer? Oh, we did see like what looked like binary data, probably an executable from the alternate data streams, right? So let's see if we could extract those. And we didn't finish looking at our PowerShell code. Maybe it does that. Hopping back to it, note that this conditional is actually set up as an else statement. So look, it's going to end up running and then do the CMSTP UAC bypass, do a little bit of privilege escalation, and then finish. It would need to run a second time for this else statement to actually take place once you have elevated privileges and you are running as admin. So does that actually happen? They call CMSTP with the, scroll location being that scroll of Eru that we saw just above. And that is what had the current file name for this code, for the script to run a second time to actually fire in the next chain of execution that will bring us down to that else block. So that ends up getting some of the base64 out of the variables we saw just above, decoding it, and again, looks like actually extracting from the alternate data streams to write content here with whatever the file names were in the other variables and values that we didn't decode, but we could see because it ends up just writing them in the current directory, but it does start the process here and then try to remove them. So for us to be able to see all this, well, we don't want this to happen. So let's try to comment out and maybe add in, a little echo. It would have actually executed this. Let's do that. Echo would be executing current directory Gandalf, and then remove the remove items, and we would echo would be removing current directory Gandalf and Aragorn. Is that Aragorn? I don't know Lord of the Rings. I feel like I'm going to lose some of my nerd, like street cred. I have never been able to sit through Lord of the Rings. I'm truly sorry. But you know what? Let's get a little bit risky again and actually run what would be, I guess, the rad temp file that we were working with as another stager.ps1 PowerShell code. And again, I'm just going to, hey, trust, we know the intuition. We've got the context. We can diffuse some of those detonators there to actually fire off the next payload. So let's try to run our stager.ps1. Stuff happened there. getting the handle as we would expect, CMSTB popping up and then hitting enter to close it, as we saw in the syntax. But we don't see our output. But it would have just staged everything that we saw in Sublime Text. And actually down below, I kind of glossed over it, but it does make some changes to Defender here. It actually adds some more exclusions to our antivirus. But if we were to now be an admin, let's try it out. Let me actually run an admin command prompt and totally run the malicious PowerShell script. Look, we're confident, we're smart, we know what we're doing here, and I gotta really reiterate and footstomp that. Make sure you're in a VM and have a little bit of confidence that you know what you're doing, and let's run the malware. It would be removing msmpeng.exe and actually removing a DLL as well, but ultimately executing the exe file. Now, those are in the current directory because they have not been removed, and we know those were binaries, right? And the next question was asking about, a signed binary. I have PE Studio actually available for us, so we could open up the portable executable files, and let me open up Explorer in this current directory. That way we can drag in what would be this msmpeng, actually bring that to our PE Studio, and it'll do its quick analysis. But what do we got here? Take a look down below at the certificate. It is a Microsoft signed binary. We could probably expect with that MSMPNG engine there. Microsoft Corporation is the full name, it looks like. So let's get back to Sherlock just to fill that out here. Microsoft Corporation. Go ahead and submit. Excellent. What do we got next? What is the final payload's entry point function? Is this the final payload? We know that there is a DLL in the same directory there. We saw our mpsvc.dll. Is it going to end up importing one function from there? Let's take a look at the imports. And I can see, presumably on the far side here, if I scroll, yeah, the library will note that mpsvc.dll. It actually imports service CRT main. Oh, so that's a cute little trick to do some like DLL side loading, right? I'm going to assume in this executable, like this Microsoft, I think that's Defender, the engine, right? File description is anti-malware service executable. Yeah, like it's literally part of Defender, and it would load the DLL with that given name and actually execute presumably what would be in the export of that function there. Service CTR main. Sorry, service CRT main. Let's try that. Service CRT main. Fingers crossed. Okay. How many anti-debugging techniques does the ransomware implement, and what is the Windows API function that the final technique leverages? Okay, so now I guess we gotta get real, right? We were just having fun in our little scripting language realm over there. But now we've got some actual executables that we gotta try to make sense of. So what I would like to do is actually fire up IDA, one of the disassemblers, one of the debuggers, really well known alongside like Ghidra, alongside Binary Ninja, and tons of others. There are a lot of great options here, but IDA is what I will choose this time around, and I am just using the free version of IDA, IDA free. But look, if I'd like to actually disassemble this executable, right now I think these are still in the E drive. I would like to go bring the DLL and the executable itself back to our investigation folder. So let me go back to the desktop and our investigation, where I can just slap those in there. Now, IDA, let's go ahead and get a new file cooking with our investigation, and let's use the DLL in this case, because again, that's presumably what it's going to end up using for real as the malware. It's not going to be in the signed Microsoft binary, right? Because that can't really be tampered with. But it'll use the DLL side loading technique to track this down. And it actually will ask me, hey, we're thinking there's a PDB file here where you could potentially pull down symbols, like debug symbols or anything that would help do a little bit more reverse engineering. We're probably not going to be able to get anything for the malware payload itself. But just in case it ends up using some like Windows API functions or stuff, I think it's good to try to hit OK and let it download the others. We don't need to look for the PDB file on disk though, because we didn't have the source code for this malware sample. At the very least, now we're cooking and it will download and get everything staged for the other symbols we might need. Why is WScript still running over there? Oh, this is the output from the actual defender.js that was ran with WScript this time rather than CScript, so it actually had the pop-up. Anyway, let's start to reverse engineer a little bit of this DLL. But we know we're going to start not at the usual DLL entry point, but the actual export that we saw within PE Studio. So what I'm going to do is just probably try to jump to a function just so I can a little bit more easily search for that name. As it displays all of these, and you'll see all the sub underscore whatever address, like that's really cluing us in, okay, we do not have debug symbols here, and it's going to be a little bit harder to reverse engineer. But that's okay. Let's try to search for, at least where we know we're starting from, service CTR main or whatever. Let me just do service because that will probably at least track down. Yeah, okay, service CRT main. So I would have got it wrong. Let me double click on that. And here we are in the graph, but I'm curious what else this does now. We actually need to end up checking if it has some anti-debugging techniques in place. And I see one right away here. It looks like it makes a call to check, is debugger present? And we've seen this before, right? In plenty of other videos, any malware analysis, Maldev Academy, hey, cooking up malware of our own. Is debugger present is totally pretty easy, bare bone basics of checking if a debugger or a tool is attached to this process running. Because if it is, the malware doesn't want to be under the microscope. So it'll just usually bail out. If we were to actually see the assembly here, it ends up calling to check if a debugger is present, test against the registers EAX against EAX, and if it's not 0, it will try to take this jump, bringing us to the conditional case where it would just exit. So we would avoid that. We want to avoid that in our own analysis because obviously we'd really like to have a debugger attached to this. But that's one, is debugger present. And if it were to actually continue onward though, not taking the jump to exit, it starts to get its own current process ID with the function call there, and then, uses the create tool help 32 snapshot trick to iterate through all of the processes running and loop through with process 32 first, process 32 next, and actually, I'm kind of curious. It's getting the process ID in one case and the parent process ID in another. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm not super duper good at tracking all the logic in assembly. So if I may, just for our learning here, I would like to press the all holy F5 and try to take a look at the pseudocode with the cloud option that would give us here to get what might at least look a little bit more like C source code that's a bit more readable for us, at least for me anyway, not being that good at assembly. But this is the pseudocode, and you can see all the function calls with a little bit more of the logic, some more of the loops, just a bit more readable. And at the end here, though, it does actually end up calling exit once again, if in the condition that something matches PowerShell.exe. Interesting. But that's the parent process ID, right? I think. Yeah, it's checking if the parent process is PowerShell, bail out. Do not continue and exit. Okay. So that's what, anti-debugging check number 2 for us. But if we were to continue on, actually getting to this condition here, the logic of whether or not PowerShell.exe is in the mix, again, just a test between these two registers. If it were to fail, you can see that it brings us to the exit. But if it were to succeed, it actually brings us to, okay, a call to close handle. So probably get rid of the Win32 snapshot to enumerate the processes. But then it calls something else. Now, this is probably worthwhile for us to look at because it's just immediately after this. And, okay. Looks like it does actually do some custom exception handlers. This is, I think, is another common technique in a lot of malware where, hey, it actually tries to add a little bit more guardrails for some execution. And if, in this case, it'll just do a soft breakpoint to trap a debugger and kill it, bail out, don't do anything. But that's probably what it's asking for. I'm going to assume that the function call that we'd like here is exactly that, the set unhandled exception filter, because just following this, if I go back with backspace or whatever, that's the last one that will call to exit. Otherwise, it'll carry and continue on with other functions, and it looks like a lot more code. So there are 3 anti-debugging techniques, and the call here, if we were to, again, maybe look at the C pseudocode, is set unhandled exception filter. All right, let's copy paste and try that. How many anti-debugging techniques? There are 3. What is the Win32 API call that is used? Set unhandled exception filter. No, what the heck? Oh, are you upset that I didn't include a space? A space character? Okay, hey, you know what? You gotta give the devil his due. Fine, sure. Glad we got that one done. The ransomware targets files with specific extensions. What is the list of extensions targeted in the exact order as the ransomware configuration stores them? Oh, sheesh. Well, I guess let's keep looking in IDA. But I think it would be smart for us to try and get out of these debug traps, right? Anti-debugging mechanisms. Well, we know there were 3 at the start for our is debugger present call, and then the checking for process, parent process being PowerShell, and that little exception trap. So what we could do is actually tweak and toggle this like at runtime. Like we can use IDA as our debugger and set a breakpoint at those calls and then just change the value of EAX or the register that it's testing against for the return value and making it something different as if it were to pass the tests. So I believe that's F2 is the hotkey in IDA. You can see that line turn red. You can see the debugger little menu just as well, where you could, hey, have some other options. Or if you to right click on a line here, you can just edit a breakpoint, disable breakpoint, create one if it's not already there, delete, blah, blah, blah. So let's stage that one. And I do want to bring us down to the test against PowerShell. That test is there. Let's F2 to set a breakpoint there. And then the call in, I guess, our trap. We could rename this, right? Let's just use N to change that to MW as a prefix. I think that's a good standard while you're reversing to try to have, what looks like malware potential maybe stuff. Exception handler. Hit OK there, but the actual test call is what we could set our debugger to. And then I think we could just hit F9 and start to run this thing. That is the hotkey, by the way, for the play button. You could use the debugger here and start process with F9. And it gives you a big bold warning here, like, look, you're going to run and detonate malware. Are you cool with this? Are you smart on this? And again, you got to have your context, threat model, risk assessment, whatever. But we are in our sandbox. Let's go try it out. Yes. Input file is a dynamic library, cannot be run by itself. Please specify. Oh, it's a DLL, right? Okay, so we could specify the process options, and we could tell it the application, the actual exe that we want to run is msmpeng, the executable here, and that is actually the start process. But it will load and put in our mpsvc.dll. That's okay. Let's click OK, fingers crossed, and it's cruising. And we've immediately hit the first breakpoint. It might download symbols for you if it hasn't already, but it should bring us to, you can see our instruction pointer is kind of graying out the current line here, but that's this test EAX is debugger present call just following. And remember, that's going to be the 32-bit representation of the 64-bit register RAX, which we can now see over in the top right in this debug mode. And I can actually double click on this and say, hey, I know it returned to 1, like true, there is a debugger present, but I want to change this to a 0. So let me just make that change and hit enter, and now there is no debugger present. This is probably a thing that's worthwhile to automate, though, if you keep kind of debugging in and out of some of the workflow here within IDA. But for now, I think we're okay with hand jamming that. Now, if we wanted to move forward in our debugging process within IDA, you could step into, with F7 as a hotkey, so follow into a new function that's called. Step over, where you actually keep cruising forward, like not falling down and looking into each and every call routine, but walking over it. And you could even run until you hit a return call to like speed run through out of one function. Same thing, you could run to the current cursor if you click around in IDA, and I believe you could continue process with F9 just to let it go. So since we have taken a look at maybe our breakpoint list, the other upcoming breakpoints for the other anti-debugging techniques, we can just hit F9 and cross our fingers that we do land right where we should. Cool. So once again, RAX, we can just nop it out, or really not nop, but hey, zero out the register, and all those zeros should match. Okay on that. Fingers crossed. I can hit F8 just to step over, and you'll see RIP, that highlight moved on to the next line. F8 once again brings us to the right logic flow, and if I F9, we'll see we do hit this software breakpoint exception, because it's still going to be calling this within IDA. But later on, after we acknowledge testing and comparing the register, then we're okay to just ignore, continue onward. So I'll hit OK on this. It'll put me in a weird place because of the int3 call, like the software breakpoint, but I'll F9 again to get to our real breakpoint that we set, that big red box. So we could ignore the exception, honestly. Doesn't need to go to the app or not. We can just hit no. That's fine. But now we're back at our test AL being one of the other smaller renditions of the RAX or EAX registers. Once again, zeroing that out. Let's click OK. And now we'll hit F8. And when it tests to compare, it won't bring us to the exit. We didn't fall down the wrong, incorrect code path. We are going to keep cruising through. Now, we have a call to another subroutine process function thing that we're going to do here that we don't have the debug symbols for, but we kind of want to know what it does. So we could step into it with F7, and now we're brought into here, which has that exact same subroutine. The address that you will see on the mix here. As we scroll through this, there's a lot of stuff, but some stuff might stick out to you, right? Oh, get module handle A, so more Win32 API functions, calls here actually getting the module name mpsvc.dll, like itself, which is weird. Find resource W. Oh, okay. It's going to be looking at its own resources to load a resource and actually extract it out. So probably, even just based off of a hunch, we would think it might grab another payload outside of itself from the resources section. We have PE Studio open, right? We could see these sections here. And yeah, the resources section has a bit higher entropy. You can see that 12.36%. Noting the entropy, oh, sorry, I was totally in the wrong ending there. Entropy is 4, better sort of kind of than the others. Still potential for some encrypted payloads in there. Maybe some things that would be another stage that's cruised through. So if we kept looking through this, we could see where we go following all these calls. But because there's a lot here, like zooming out, I'm pretty sure, yeah, this graph of logic is kind of crappy. You know what? Let's look at the C source. So I'll hit F5 here. And where do we go? Starting at the top, let me drill down into and click into the other subroutines that are called here. This is doing something, doing stuff. It calls a maybe V9. Does that ever actually get ran? Not really. All right, I'm going to backspace out of that one. Mem move, probably going to be staging some data. So honestly, we can just kind of gloss over this until we see calls that look a little bit more glaring. Vector too long, not all that helpful. We could rename these if we're seeing things that just aren't going to be useful to us. Next one down below. More malloc, memory management shenanigans. Keep cruising. What is this? Here's another sub. Ooh. At least the very top of this looks like there's a lot more going on. Bcrypt handle, algorithm, bcrypt, secret, IV, initialization vectors. Yeah, input and output. This must be, I'm going to go on a hunch here, hopefully not too far on the ledge, but okay. Decryption routine. Yep, there's bcrypt, decrypt. Nice. The resource inside of the DLL. So another payload embedded in that it's going to end up decrypting out. Now, this is wild because we could set a breakpoint within IDA and let it unravel, decrypt itself, just like we've been doing previously with all the scripting language opportunities, but actually go see, look, what did you just decode? Is it going to be in the heap? In memory, right? So what I'll do is actually just set a payload or a breakpoint, F2 on my keyboard right at the end here. And I think I can trust just F9 bringing us there. So after bcrypt, decrypt finishes running, I just want to look at the registers. I want to look at the memory. I want to see what's going on. Let me hit F5 to get there. And there we are. And what do we have? Hey, let me scroll down, try to expand a couple of these menus out here. RAX, obviously our BX, our CX, our DX. You see some RDI things, and that actually has debug 140. So it's not on the stack, but it's in the heap, right? I can click on that or go to the arrow here, but that's just displaying in the bytes. Interesting. At least trying to read this vertically, that looks like data, right? Let me click into the hex view and then press the arrow. And yeah, okay, totally. It's like JSON. There's JSON data that is presumably a configuration file. Including the file extensions that it actually encrypts as part of the ransomware. And HTML content. So it looks like the config file for the ransomware payload itself. Like its actual understanding of what it will do when it operates here. What we might be able to do, and this is kind of neat, if we actually right click, I think we can change this to data, and that will display this all a little bit better for us in the dump here. I think I just ASCII string, right? Because we want to pull all this out. And copying and pasting this out of IDA is a little annoying. I don't know if there's a better way to do this, and forgive me, that's just my ignorance, but I'm gonna select all this, copy it out, and then I'll just kind of cut it up within Sublime Text. So new file within Sublime Text, I'm going to paste all this in, and the top line is good. The bottom line is kind of good. Let me remove that here. But all the middle lines are the ones that I want to trim. So I'm actually going to select all of them and then Control-Shift-L to get multiple cursors. Then I can hop around with the Home and N keys or Control, or just hold down Shift to try and remove the stuff that I don't want, deleting it from every single line. And we could do the very, very same on all the other ends of this. As you can see, they have the single quote trailing here. I do want to remove that. And needed to do the very same for the top line. But now if I replace all the new line characters like \n with regular expressions, replace them with nothing, Control-Alt-Enter, that looks like JSON. Like that looks like data that is what it should be and readable. So this includes the user folders that will likely encrypt. Can I set the syntax to JSON? Yeah. Let me install like a pretty JSON beautifier and formatter real quick. Format JSON. Okay, cool. So user folders, desktop documents, downloads, music, file extensions as we saw. And they wanted this provided in the actual Sherlock. So let me cut that up. It looks like they don't want to have the trailing strings at the end, but they do want to have the commas. So let me put all those back and then delete to have this whole output as correct as we should. Let me try and paste that in. Hopefully that's right. No. Oh, do you need the stinking space characters included again? All right. Okay. Let me wrestle with that. Yep. Okay, fine. What do we got next? What is the FQDN of the ransomware server the malware connects to? Oh. Okay, so we were able to track down the config from the decrypted resources payload, but if we continue on in the code, I'm sure it's going to try to track down, like a command and control framework to a certain extent, to, hey, get an encryption key, decryption key, work with this Red Badger ransomware group, and keep track of the victim ID for the extortion, the blackmail. So let me get back into IDA, and then let's just kind of keep walking through this. Let's do F8 to keep stepping over for a little bit. And then once we get to a call instruction, I want to see what else it will do. So F7 will step into that. And then I want to examine this with just that quick, simple F5 to kind of see things in action. I did see a call just above. Let me click into that. Oh, there's another string too long. Okay, so that one's not helpful. This function doesn't look all that worthwhile for us. Let's Control F7 to get to the end of this. Bringing us back to where we were. We can keep walking, move into a new call. Let's see what this one does. Blah, blah, blah. Let's get out of that. Control F7 to keep walking. F8, 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 etc. Get process heap, decrypt, destroy. Okay, so this is still kind of the same routine that we were just finishing up in. Maybe we can F7 out of this one. This was the decryption routine, right? Control F7, bring me back to where we were. Now, in the greater function that we were in, we can keep walking, and let's kind of gloss over a lot of these because, again, they aren't other calls that I'm super interested in. I do want to hopefully eventually find something new that we do here, etc., 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 etc. Here's a call with a sub. Let me step into that. What does this do? Oh, notes the user folders, and then probably starts to stage some of these things here. But we're looking for a domain, FQDN, right? Fully qualified domain that it tries to connect to. Is it genuinely going to like make requests over there? Network traffic, right? Let me keep walking, and maybe we could honestly just look at this with the decompiled bit, but JJ free, I'm not super worried about. You all remember Ice JJ Fish? I'm sorry, if that was not in your mind before, it should be now. Return. Okay, so yeah, that one wasn't helpful for us. Where do we go following this? Still walking, still walking. Here's another call, F7. Ooh! Win HTTP example program that does call Win HTTP open. Okay, so it's gonna do Win HTTP stuff, right? And with that, could we just search for any of those symbols, right? Or jump to, I think that's easiest. Jump by name, and that way we could search for Win HTTP. And yeah, okay, so we'll end up using later on Win HTTP connect, send request, open, receive, response. So there is capability in here to do that network comms. Let me double click to go there. We can see that it'll bring us to just kind of the declaration definition here, but the cross references and EC references are really where it's going to be used. Let me double click into that. This is our connect call. So let's set a breakpoint here, F2. And then let's F9 to speed run down there. Do we get there? Yeah, we're here. Now let's look again at our registers. And can I expand any of these? Okay, we're getting the windows where they should be. What is here in RAX? That doesn't look like interesting data. How about RBX? Also doesn't look like interesting data. RCX, we're probably going to be looking at parameters, right, obviously, to this call. So the x64 calling conventions would put the server name in RDX, I believe. So if we go to that, yeah, this looks like something. Let me see that in the hex view. API.ltchealthcare.co. API.ltchealthcare.co. That's what it connects to, right? Let's try it. API.ltchealthcare.co. Did I get that right? Did I spell that right? Yeah, okay, cool. Task 9. What is the MITRE ATT&CK ID the ransomware uses to run its final payload? Well, we're in the final payload right now. Are we? The DLL is what's going to do it. We saw a lot of the encryption capability already. They're just using the DLL sideloading, right? Is MITRE ATT&CK for that? Because they were using MSMP ENG, like actual defender, to load this DLL with that service CTR main. MITRE ATT&CK framework DLL sideloading. Hijack execution flow, DLL sideloading. Is it this one? Let's try it. Fingers crossed. Yeah, okay. That was it. Sweet. Task 10. What is the full URL including port number of the ransomware group's customer service portal? That would be in the ransom note, wouldn't it? Oh, and we still had in the config file, like the configuration JSON that we pulled out from seeing the resources extracted and decrypted, there was base64 that we didn't decrypt yet, or decode. So let's go look at that. I think that was literally called HTML content. Yeah. HTML content right here. So let's copy and paste all that base64, and let me CyberChef decode that. We can just slap this all in. Ooh, yep, okay. Looks like it's giving us what seems to be HTML. Can I copy paste this? We get downloaded or whatever, but let me put this as our investigation ransom note.html. And here is the ransomware demand notice. Let me open up that ransom note. Ransomware demand notice and that Red Badger ransom group with the WebP file. Look, we got the images here. We've encrypted your data and exfiltrated critical files. Please browse to this Tor onion address, given the port 9001, because it's over 9000. Copy paste that. And I think that's what we're looking for the customer service department. Okay. They have the 5-star Yelp review. Copy, paste, submit. Excellent. We're at the end. Holy cow. What is the file extension used to store the newly encrypted files? I guess like the easiest way to figure that out is to run the ransomware, right? So we know that this is going to end up decrypting from our desktop. So can I just put a little text file on the desktop? New text file, hack the box, Sherlock's.txt, and that can say like, please subscribe. And then we can just let the execution finish, right? We should take a snapshot of our virtual machine. Do not detonate the malware before taking a snapshot of your virtual machine. Truth be told, we probably should have done that before we started to live debug the DLL payloads themselves. All right, I'm just gonna go outside of the IDA debugger and then, trust in our sandbox here. Let me do it up. I'll double click on and run the malware. Minimizing this after it's done, now we've got a .evil file. That's the file extension. .evil is what it ends up kind of changing everything to. Let me enter that, .evil, and we can go ahead and submit. And are there any other tasks? No, we did it! We did it! Hey! Lockpick 4.0, an insane Sherlock from Hack the Box. Hey, we got to cruise through it. Learn a little bit of IDA all along the way, and goodness, I had a little bit of fun doing a bit more reverse engineering in a compiled binary rather than just, the scripting language stuff that I know I tend to stick to. With that said, this has probably been a significantly longer video than most, so I hope you've been willing to stick along for the ride. But hey, if I may say, this is really, really cool. And I love a lot of the Sherlock exercises that come from Hack the Box. I'd like to do a heck of a lot more of them. I don't think I've been able to give them yet the time that they are due. But look, Hack the Box is doing incredible stuff, and I think a lot of these Sherlock exercises getting into more digital forensics, incident response, malware analysis, blue team work is really cool. I think this was a fantastic Sherlock, and I hope you did too. Please, please, please do give them some love. I don't think it's any secret here. Hey, Hack the Box has been the lovely sponsor of today's video, and I'm super grateful for all their support of the channel. And thank you for, letting me do real cool stuff, like actually digging into it. Hey, hands-on, practical, application-based learning. That's the best stuff with Hack the Box. There is a link in the video description for you to check them out and do this Sherlock and many, many more. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do all those YouTube algorithm things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.